Howdy. In this video, I'm going to be trying to cover all of the major changes Bungie made with waveframe grenade launchers in the final shape. Afterwards, we'll discuss where they sit in the current meta, as well as discuss the new waveframe sword and its potential use cases. So this background footage here is pre-final shape with my forbearance, and as you can see, the wave goes a decent distance that I'm imagining is the 22 meters that they mentioned. Now this next footage here is post-final shape with a completely unchanged blast radius stat from pre-final shape, which in my case comes out to about 52. We'll talk about blast radius in a bit, but as you can see, the length of the wave is barely shorter than pre-final shape, making me wonder if they really pushed it back to 15 meters. And now, the last thing I wanted to test out is I maxed out the blast radius on my forbearance, got it as high as it could go, which was 75. Now, as you can see on this clip, it barely changes the length of it at all, if anything, really. And on top of that, I took 3 screenshots, which I'll show here in a second. I compiled them for you, to see if having a higher blast radius really matters at all. And as you can see with this image here, there is literally no visual difference between all 3. So don't worry about speccing into blast radius. It doesn't change anything. Just keep using whatever you already have your waveframe specced into. Briefly, before I talk about the chain reaction changes, I want to touch on heavy waveframes by saying that these guys are virtually unchanged. And by that I mean they still don't have a good use case in any content. Their job is to clear adds as a heavy weapon, but they are far less ammo efficient than a machine gun and don't have that same ability to chunk down majors as steady fire from a machine gun does. The only positive change for heavy GLs really only applies to Hullabaloo, because if I remember correctly, that's the only heavy waveframe that can get chain reaction, other than the sword from the raid, but we'll talk about that in a second. Chain reaction received a 30% damage buff on heavy weapons. Moving on from that positive chain reaction buff, let's take a look at the negative side of the chain reaction changes. That being a 15% AoE, meaning area of effect nerf, and a 20% damage nerf. I used my forbearance all legend campaign and pretty much all post campaign as well, so I got a pretty good feel for the nerf, and I have to say, this one can be felt a lot more than the length changes. Leaving enemies that would have died pre-final shape now in finisher range or above makes it harder to warrant using a wave frame with chain reaction. Another gripe I have with this change is that once Martyr's Retribution gets re-released into the loot pool, it will completely overshadow any wave frame with chain reaction due to its ability to roll with incandescent. I personally don't see the point in nerfing chain reaction just to basically add it back the same as it was, if not better, because of solar synergy in the form of incandescent. The next question I wanted to pose was if running a wave frame is even good anymore. My answer to that question is no. They have not been good since Double Special got nerfed like a year ago. When options like Sunshot and Gravelance and Trinity Ghoul exist, it's hard to warrant using a special weapon for ad clear when a primary is filling the same role but better. Not to mention how many abilities you can use for crowd control these days. You may be thinking, dude, you don't have to run double special when you run a wave frame, and you'd be right. The problem with that is the vast majority of primary weapons that you pair a wave frame with are also meant for ad clear, so you'd be doubling up on that role, which isn't exactly the smartest thing to do. That's not to say you can't feasibly run a wave frame with a primary. Final Warning pairs pretty well with forbearance since Final Warning can melt majors, which fills the role the normal special weapon would do, and that is the entire reason I started using that silly sidearm. But sadly, it's just not the same as back when you could run Izzy, forbearance, and a rocket and not have to worry about getting 8 bajillion special finishers to fuel that. Lastly, I wanted to talk about waveframe swords and how they may have a place in the meta, especially Ergo Sum. Ergo is kind of the new DPS meta due to the ability to grant Wolfpack rounds to other swords, and on top of that, it can roll with the new waveframe frame for swords. Although something like Risk Runner plus waveframe is probably better for ad clear, the split between the support aspect of Wolfpack rounds and the ad clear, albeit a little more limited than Risk Runner, of the wave, I believe that Galahorn sword roll is going to be a staple in most high-end players' inventories. As for the raid sword, it can get chain reaction on it, which makes it a solid choice for ad clear considering the buff to chain reactions on heavies we talked about a couple moments ago. However, in mid to high-end content, using a heavy as anything other than movement or DPS tool is often considered throwing, or not worth using, which in ad clear heavy tends to fall under. Ad clear heavies do have their place to shine this season since the seemingly new double special meta, in which Still Hunt will do all the damage, is proving to be very popular, leaving that heavy slot open, which will allow access to machine guns and now waveframe swords to fill that ad clear slot. That's all I've got for this video. In the next video, I plan on covering the reintroduction of the double special meta, but if there are any other topics you would want me to cover, comment them down below. I do read every comment. I also have a plan for a probably like an hour-long Void Warlock mastery video with a couple friends who are very talented in the Void Warlock department. So that video might take a while to come out. Subscribe, I guess, if you enjoyed, and send this video to a friend who is hard coping about Waveframe still being meta. That friend is me. All right, bye.